Where does he live?
Oh, close. You're hell. And then they came here. They're very brave. And also,
Yes.
and that's why.
Don't forget, you said Europe must have been hell. That's a very, very realistic appraisal.
We're glad that you're here, and we're going to start with.
Good afternoon. I am Sue Bonsteel, and I am one of the conveners of the Mid-Hudson chapter of the Episcopal Peace Fellowship. The EPF is a national organization whose purpose is to connect all who seek a deliberate response to injustice and violence. We commit ourselves to prayer, to study, and action for peace and justice in our communities, in our church, and in our world. As such, the EPF is a great admirer of Bishop Dietschy. He has a passion for economic and social justice and is a strong and courageous voice that inspires and encourages us to address the complexities of gun violence in our nation. In a time when fear, cynicism, and greed threaten to overwhelm the national conversation regarding responsible gun ownership and effective gun control, we are greatly in need of more spiritual leaders like Bishop Dietschy. Therefore, it is my great honor to welcome and introduce our friend, the Right Reverend Andrew Dietschy, the 16th Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of New York.
I'm told you have to talk right into this thing. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. This event that's brought us here together today is sponsored by the Mid-Hudson chapter of the Episcopal Peace Fellowship and the Social Concerns Committee of the Episcopal Diocese of New York. It is just a great honor and pleasure as the bishop of this diocese to welcome everyone here today and to the conversations that not only are happening today but will be begun because of this gathering today. We know that we are here and that a new chapter in the national conversation about gun violence has begun because of the killings at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. And in saying that, I want to remind us that we are in a season of repentance. And that while the killings in Newtown are unspeakably tragic, they are only a part of the ongoing tapestry of gun violence that underlies our life in the United States of America and in so many of our cities. The death of those young children has moved the country to a new voice in a way that the death of several hundred young children in Chicago last year did not. And the death of young people in parts of our diocese and in the city of New York have not. And as we go forward in this conversation, we know that we need to bring together the occasional, episodic, particularly horrific examples of gun violence with the day-to-day bread and butter killing of a violent culture and society in which we live. You will see in the service order program brochure that was given to you when you came in today, on the last 2 pages, a statement issued by the House of Bishops of the Episcopal Church, which met in North Carolina last week. The statement calls on us to do almost nothing, but it commits the Episcopal Church to engage in and bring leadership to the conversation. The gathering that we are in right now, this event today, was long planned before that statement was authored or approved or ratified by the House of Bishops. But I believe that what we are doing today is the beginning of the kind of conversation that the bishops are calling on the church to lead and to bring into the public discourse of our communities. So I'm proud that we are doing this. I think it's important, and I believe that we are now entering a new chapter of our life in the United States in terms of social justice and gun violence. We have a momentum which is fragile. And we will only be able to use this momentum to do new things to serve justice and to promote life and freedom if we continue this conversation right now and keep the momentum alive before our elected officials. So I want to tell you something. On May 20th, 1988, I was a younger priest than I am now, and serving at Christ Church in Winnetka, Illinois, on the staff of that parish. I was, during that year, the convener of our Ecumenical Ministerial Association. And on the morning of May the 20th, our ecumenical clergy were meeting together at, if I remember correctly, the Congregational Church in town. While we were meeting, the parish secretary came in where we were and told us that there was a shooting at Hubbard Woods Elementary School, and we were all asked to go there at once. So we got in our cars and headed over to the elementary school, where we went inside and learned that a young woman in her 30s, someone raised in the community, a person of disturbed mental health, had come into the school with weapons and had gone into a third grade classroom and shot it up. We were alarmed to learn that she was still at large in the school and no one knew where she was, and we were in the school. So we huddled in a frightened mass in the school lobby as the police continued to look for this person and eventually did find her. She did some more shooting in the neighborhood before she took her own life. This was one of the early school shootings. I mean, really early. We weren't used to this in those days. Now it mostly doesn't make the news. You have to have a high body count to make the news now. And in that shooting, only one boy died. But there were 5 third graders who were seriously wounded in the shooting. And one was a little girl who was a member of the parish that I served. All of the children who were wounded were taken to the hospital, and as time went on, I got to know this little girl's father. They were members of our church, but they didn't come very often. And he talked to me about the changes that they were going to make as a family in terms of their life in the faith. And they became very committed, active members of the congregation. The little girl who had been shot, who was a member of our congregation, was the most seriously wounded, as I remember, of the children who lived. Later, the surgeon who saved her life reported that when she was brought into the surgery, there was no blood in her heart, and that to get her heart going again, they had to inject blood into her heart with a needle. Later, a couple months later, before she was released from the hospital, her doctor came to see her that morning and told her that he had seen her come back to life on the operating table in front of him. And he said, "I will never forget that. And I want to tell you that, and to tell you that I believe that God has saved you for a purpose." Now, when I learned that, I thought, that is a lot to lay on an 8-year-old. But this was a person who had paid in a very specific and personal way the cost of violence in America, and of gun violence specifically. And I do believe that she was saved for a purpose, but I'm not sure that that purpose is to write the great American novel or to cure cancer. I think the purpose for which she was saved is the same purpose for which we who are alive and live in that same culture, and who in different ways pay a cost also for living in a violent culture, that we who have been saved in that culture are also saved to a purpose. Every life is diminished by living against the background of such violence. Every life must live in some measure of fear. Every life is constrained. Every life is devalued by the devaluing of other lives. And all of us pay a cost for living our lives in a society and a culture which is so soaked in violence, and in which the proliferation and presence of guns is a symbol of what we take seriously and of where our priorities are as a people. We are saved, as that little girl was, to a purpose. And that is to make our witness in that kind of world of what a Christian does and says in the context of that life-demeaning violence, and of what God in Christ calls us to in our lives and relationships with one another as brothers and sisters. We bishops of this diocese in New York issued a statement not long ago, joining our voice and that of our diocese with the larger national conversation about gun legislation. This is what we do as citizens, and we engage that conversation out of our understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ as we have received it. It is not the sum of our obligations as Christians. We are called to a transformational life in the communities in which we live. We have been told by Jesus that we are to be the leaven in the loaf that raises the whole. The leaven in the loaf that raises everybody. The light of the world that is set up on a high stand to illuminate every dark corner. We have more that we are called to do than advocate for public policy. But our advocacy of public policy is our responsibility. And all else that follows is our call and vocation as people of faith. None of us can know where this conversation begun now will take us, nor can we see or anticipate the costs, the sacrifices, and the opportunities that will come to us as we seek to engage our wider community in this conversation now and in the days and months to come. All we know is that after Newtown, after the daily, continuous assault on the members of our church and cities and communities all across our country, this conversation is our purpose. So today, here in Christ Church, where we as a diocese and community gather, we engage that conversation in a new way. Today needs to be the beginning of something, not an event. It needs to be the start of something important, something big, something life-renewing, something community-transforming, something life-giving, that we begin now as a witness to the wider community in the world that we have been called by Jesus. Those of us in the Episcopal Church, other churches, to a particular way of being in the world that we commend to all people, that we give to all people as a vision for a common life. So I'm very happy to introduce the program that we have here this afternoon. We have some people who are going to speak longer than I did. We have some people who are going to speak briefly. We have a number of people who will come at this issue and these questions from different directions and engage it in different ways and inspire us in conversations that we will have together in a little bit later this afternoon. I'm proud of what we are doing here today. I have high hopes, and I am confident that, inspired by the Spirit of our God, we can and will make things happen that the world will notice, that will change the world, that will save lives and make all lives new.
Good evening. I'm Bill Parnell. I serve as the Archdeacon for Mission of the Diocese of New York. We are very fortunate this evening to have several civic leaders with us, and I want to introduce them to you, and some of them will be speaking to you briefly as well. We're very fortunate to have with us this evening Joseph Rich, who is member of the Poughkeepsie Common Council. He is representing the 2nd Ward, and he's also a member of Christ Church Poughkeepsie. And we also are very fortunate this evening to have the chairman of the Poughkeepsie Common Council representing the 3rd Ward of the city, Chairman Robert L. Mallory, Jr., who will come and greet us.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the City of Poughkeepsie and the Common Council, I welcome you. I welcome you for this discussion, this rally on gun violence. We as a community must exhaust every effort to reduce gun violence. So let's be educated and strive to achieve this goal. With the assistance of others and your input, I look forward to a positive reaction to the problems that plague our community. Thank you, and let's have a healthy discussion. Thank you very much.
Representing New York State Assembly District 104, Assemblyman Frank Skartatos, who is going to come and greet us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the honor and recognition. As you know, recently, under the leadership of Governor Cuomo, the New York State Legislature passed a common sense gun control bill, a safety bill, to protect the lives of all New Yorkers. And I dare say that if that bill was in place in Connecticut, the tragedy that occurred there would have never happened. Why? Because a young man was able to fire 152 some odd rounds within 5 minutes. These clips that hold more than 30 ammunitions at a time are unacceptable. This was not an easy vote for me. Faced major background noise opposing this legislation, but it was the right thing to do, and I have no qualms about voting for it. I'll do it all over. Ladies and gentlemen, in a civilized society, we do not need military-style weapons to go hunting or to protect ourselves. And when our Constitution was written, those muskets took a lot longer than 5 minutes to load and unload. I believe in our Constitution and our Second Amendment. But I also believe that that should not infringe on the rights, life, and liberty on anyone else. The Almighty has given us the power to think, conceptualize, and conceive, and think about what we are doing. And what we're doing here today is the right thing because, again, it's that little thing inside has given us that says, you know when we do something right, when we do something wrong. Well, right now I feel we're doing something right. And indeed, the future is in our hands. Thank you, and God bless you.
We've tried to keep a list of elected officials, civic leaders who are here, and we want to make sure we've recognized everyone. If you are an elected official and we didn't realize you're here, will you make yourself known? I know that member of the Town Council of Standardsville, our own Johanna Schaefer, is here tonight, member of the Church of the Regeneration in Pine Plains. Is there anyone else that we've missed? Governor Andrew Cuomo is in the midst of budget negotiations, and he could not be here this evening, but he not only sent his greetings and his support to us, he also sent a member of his staff tonight, and so it's with great pleasure that we welcome Mary Cavaney, who is the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Public Safety of the state of New York.
Good evening. I'm very pleased to be here. I told my press officer, Michelle, that with a captive audience like this and it being St. Pat's, that I would start with some Danny Boy. But I'll spare you that because I see the look of horror on her face at this time, so I'll just keep from that. I'm very honored to be here. I'm pleased to be invited by the Bishop, Reverend Blake Ryder, and our Archdeacon, Bill Parnell. We are here to talk about gun violence, and I think that any member of state government cannot do that without working with community groups like your own. And I bring with me the congratulations from Governor Cuomo about all the initiatives that the diocese is doing. And I look at your agenda, I've been provided material, I look at your work with at-risk youth, I look at your work with reentry and your firearms agenda, and I see how both of the state agendas and that of the Episcopal Diocese complement each other. Almost every week, every month, every day, I'm sadly reminded about why such collaborative efforts are so important. For this week, I was looking in the newspaper that does the running toll of Americans killed by gun violence since Newtown. And sadly, this week's statistics was 2,693 Americans killed by gun violence just in the last 3 months. And I was thinking about that sad statistic as I drove out to Herkimer County on Wednesday, because we had, as most of you probably know, another shooting spree in Western New York. And a man came in and killed 2 men in a barber shop, and then he killed 2 men in a Jiffy Lube. And I was thinking about those 4 families, and I was thinking about those 4 men, those 4 fathers and uncles and sons and brothers that weren't going to go home that day. And I think about how tomorrow starts Youth Violence Reduction Week, and I think how critical it is for us to work together. And I'm reminded that if government has one sacred obligation, just one, it is to keep its people safe. And that's done in a couple of ways. It can be done through legislation, it can be done through reentry, and taking care of our youth. The most visible sign of the work that we're doing for Governor Cuomo was the SAFE Act, as the Assemblyman mentioned, signed January 15th. And with no disrespect to the Assemblyman, sometimes I don't like the phrase gun control, because I feel like it misses the point of the legislation. It is not the guns we are trying to control, it is the violence we are trying to reduce. And when you look at this piece of legislation, it doesn't answer all questions. It doesn't fix all situations, but it does meet with the agenda of the Episcopal Diocese, which was to outlaw assault weapons, reduce the access to high-capacity magazines, and it does provide for background checks. So you had a progressive firearms agenda that I believe the SAFE Act has met. Especially when you look at a time now on our federal agenda, the optimism is dying now of that of getting universal background checks. And I'm proud to say, as of this past Friday, we have universal background checks in New York State. It's a common sense situation. It's estimated that 40% of firearms are transferred between private individuals. Why should someone have a background check when they buy a gun at a store and not have a background check when they buy the gun from their neighbor? Why do average civilians need access to military-style weapons? We are now a one-feature test for assault weapons like that of California. Some of the characteristics of the weapons that have been banned are like a protruding pistol grip. That allows the shooter, if injured, to shoot with one hand. The assault weapons ban is not to take guns from people, it's to limit lethality to regular civilians in our state, and that has been done. The other provisions of the SAFE Act, we have a mental health provision, where if two physicians agree someone's a danger to themselves or other, the firearm is reported, or the incident is reported to the state, and they confirm that the individual has a firearm, it is taken. It also provides for safety in schools, and it provides for 8 new crimes. Crimes that better punish those who kill first responders in the course of their duties, those who hurt children in crossfires. It creates a new crime for a community gun. There's a phenomena in some of our urban centers where guns are left under stoops, they're left in garbage cans, so that gangs can have access to them. And now that is a felony in our state. It outlaws guns in schools and better punishes schools and guns that are at schools and guns that are on buses. And it better punishes gangs that terrorize people with firearms or traffic drugs with firearms. But I think it's clear to say that gun violence is not one of those things that we can just arrest ourselves out of the situation. We can't just pass new laws and lock people up. That does not answer all the questions. And as your diocese knows, part of the answer is about reentry. In the old days, law enforcement used to think reentry was soft on crime, and it was just being good to ex-offenders, and it really served no purpose. But 20 years later, we're smarter now. We understand that to treat ex-offenders with education, with job training, with housing, is not only the humane thing to do, it makes us all safer. People recidivate at a much lower rate. We have reentry task forces all over the state that fund by the state when they take high-risk offenders from prison. This complements the agenda of the Episcopal Diocese. I understand that you have a reentry project here in Dutchess County and one in Manhattan, serving ex-offenders. It will keep us safer. We also look at the state to what are we going to do with our youth? You know, the recidivism rate for young people who've been locked up, 3 years later, 87% of them are rearrested again. We are failing miserably at our at-risk youth. So I was very interested to see the RISE project that there's in New York City in one of your parishes, how identified at-risk youth are brought in, met with the faith community, educators, and helped out through these dangerous times in dangerous communities. And their parents are also given key tools. This is similar to the identification of at-risk youth at the Strong Memorial Hospital program. The state is trying to pursue a program that they have when a young person comes in that's been shot or stabbed, it's very likely they're going to come back as a victim again, or in a body bag, or as a defendant. And this program seeks to interrupt that cycle of violence with the young people. It seeks to bring in the faith community ex-offenders, services, and their parents to see if the cycle can be stopped. It's very, very critical. One other program we have also is called the Violent Felony Forum. This was started in Chicago by a professor by the name of Tracy Mears. This brings in guys that have been paroled on violent crimes, most of them gun cases, and sits the individual down with a member of law enforcement, a member of the service provider community, and talks to them about the fact that they're at risk to recidivate. Law enforcement sends the message, we want you to be successful, but if you pick up a gun again, you're going back to prison, and you're going back for a long time. The service provider says if you need education, if you need drug treatment, let us know. We want to be there for you. An ex-offender said it's not easy, but you can do it. I did. So I think it's critical that state government work with organizations like the Episcopal Diocese on these critical programs. It's not legislation, it's legislation combined with reentry, combined with targeting our youth, and any other creative program that works. Remember, and I don't have to tell people here, gun violence doesn't hit our communities equally. Last year, the homicide victims in the state of New York in the impact jurisdictions, what are the 17 counties that make up 80% of the crime for the state, 89% of the gun homicide victims were people of color. And I think whether gun violence occurs in a sleepy community of 800 in Herkimer County, or whether it occurs in one of our urban centers, the heartbreak is the same. So I congratulate you and thank you for your efforts and continue to work with you. And at this time, in honor of St. Pat's, I hope I don't offend anyone. The only thing I know how to say in Irish is the sign of the cross. So I'll do that briefly. Anamnu nahu, Ogden Vic, Oxen Spirit Neve. Amen. God bless you and thank you.
All of us are here tonight because we have concern about the level of gun violence in our society. But there are many of us who've been affected directly by that violence, knowing someone who was murdered, a friend or a neighbor who got caught in the crossfire, a child who picked up a gun that wasn't locked safely in a house, a loved one who committed suicide. I'm wondering how many of you, like me, have been directly affected by gun violence and know someone who was shot or killed. If you're able, would you stand? I invite you to name the names of those people. Don Newquist. Thank you. Legislation is critical, but we also have people who are working on the front lines in communities that endure violence every day, that endure gun violence every day. And we want to hear from one of those people who's one of our own. Gloria Cruz is the director of the St. Anne's Anti-Violence Project in the South Bronx. She's one of us who have been affected most critically by gun violence, and we want to give her a chance to speak to us now. Gloria?
Good afternoon, and thank you for everyone for having me here, Bishop Dichi, and everyone in the Episcopal Diocese of New York. Hold the mic down. Okay, closer? Sorry. I'm short. We're here today, and it's a privilege and an honor to get to this point because of opening conversations. And conversations is what we need to combat gun violence. We have been tragically hit over and over and over again, but in our urban areas, it happens every day. I have brought a few people with me that have been affected by gun violence because they're no longer with us. Our youngest is 2 years old, and our oldest is 92 years old. And this affects everyone, and their families have been destroyed. But with the support of everyone, what they can do to help us combat gun violence in our communities, at home, in the urban areas, everywhere, you can do your part to be part of a movement. And we're asking everyone to do their right as a person, as a human being, as an Episcopalian, to step up and be part of this movement. And I am grateful and honored that the Episcopal Diocese of New York has stepped up to this task. And we as Episcopalians need to continue to support and nurture. Our children are our future. And when 20 young children who have not had a chance to live have been sacrificed, we have to fight in their honor because they did not die in vain. And for all the people that have passed due to gun violence, we have to continue to be their voices because they no longer have a voice. And I ask everyone here to continue this fight. Every year, the day before Mother's Day, we always have a walk, and we were up to our 8th one, and we are going to have it again in the Bronx. I would love everyone to come and show their support and continue to show their support. We march against gun violence to let everyone know in our communities that it takes one person to the other person to keep building and changing communities. And I need everyone to hear, to understand that the children are our future. We have to nurture them, we have to help them, we have to educate them and each other to combat gun violence in our community. Thank you.
It's great to be concerned. It's better to get organized. And so we have invited someone who we believe can help us get organized tonight. Adam Barbanel-Fried is with the Industrial Areas Foundation, which is a community organizing group that has worked with members of churches and other communities of faith all over this country to help us have an impact in communities. Adam is currently working with an organization called Westchester United, which involves communities of faith of a variety of traditions, among them Episcopal churches in Westchester County. Right now, their focus is on the preservation of kindergarten, specifically in the community of Portchester in Westchester County, where the kindergarten program has been under the threat of disappearing because of budget cuts. And Westchester United has had an impact not only in that county, but also statewide, because New York is one of only 3 states that does not mandate kindergarten. But Adam is here tonight to give us a kind of a 101 in community organizing, to give us some basic tools that we can use as we go back to our communities. Adam?
Thank you. I have something on my ear here which they tell me is a microphone that I've never used before. It sounds like you can hear me, right? It's fine. I hear my voice echoing. Good. I'm just I put together a little PowerPoint here. Excuse me. Pull this up. There we go. My lovely wife of nearly 10 years said, "I'm not taking your name, it's too long." And whenever you introduce yourself, make sure you say it and put it up on the screen. So that's my name, Adam Barbanel-Fried. I've been organizing with the Industrial Areas Foundation and other efforts since 2000. And I have seen some really exciting efforts come about when people come together and actually realize their capacity for change. Corporate and political leaders usually don't change, don't embrace change, unless there's some interest, some overriding push, some kind of pressure to get them to do so. And yet too often people don't realize that they have the power to come together and try and make that happen. When I was in Chicago, we were able to successfully close down one of the small number of rogue gun dealers that were knowingly selling weapons to criminals. We were able to use some of the lessons we're going to talk about today to get 66,000 people eligible and funded for working class, working families, eligible and funded for health care. These are the lessons we used when we built the Nehemiah homes in the South Bronx, working with great people like Father Burt Bennett down there. And we will have about, in the next year or so, there will have been 6,500 units of homes built in the South Bronx and East Brooklyn, which Episcopal Church played a huge role in helping to make a reality. I was lead organizer of South Bronx Church for 4 years, where I met Gloria and where I worked closely with Father Bennett. And anyway, so here are 4 essential questions which we will hope that you can actually see. Can everyone see if I stand here? Yes. Okay. And before I even start, I just want to tell a little story. You know, I have a friend who's a doctor in London, and he told me, you know, in London they go through these rotations for the first few years as a doctor. Every 6 months you switch. And one year he was working in an emergency room in a tough area in London. And they said, and he says, a gunshot victim came in. And guess what? Nobody knew what to do. There they are in the biggest city in a Western country with all the blessings of modern medicine, and they didn't know what to do with a gunshot victim. None of the doctors, with all of their training. And someone said, I know, I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call this one person who knows how to do it. And guess what country that person got his training in? You got it. It is a sad shame that we have on our hands. What was that number she said? Over 2,000 people just since December? 20 or 30,000 a year? That's terrible. We had an event, yes, we're working on kindergarten, but we had an event Thursday night with our sister organization, Westchester United did, with our sister organizations from Connecticut and New Jersey, because we are exploring this, because we are mobilized by this. And we had a leader there who came from Mexico. I mean, he's American, but he's Mexican-American, from St. Gabriel's Catholic Church on the west side of New Rochelle. The stories from there, that community mostly comes from Michoacan. And he said that the drug cartels are better armed than the Mexican police. And guess where the drug cartels buy their weapons? Here. United States. So we really need to be very, all those things, I don't need to preach to the choir here, of course, but I do want to say that we have a real series of issues on our hands, and we also have an opportunity in history, I think. And so here are some questions that we like to ask in the Industrial Areas Foundation. And here's some questions that we've learned to be very helpful in designing effective actions. Number one is a question of leadership. Do we have leaders who care deeply about the issue and are willing to pursue it? How many people have been to the White House and seen that lady? Is she still there? She's like camping out in front since the 1968, I think. God bless her, you know, she probably is struggling, you know, but I don't know if I do, I don't want to be that person out there. I want to make an impact. I want to know that if I'm investing some time and energy, it's going to make a difference. So I want to know that there are people in the room there with me who are going to commit to this. And that they're leaders, that they have followers. So that when we get into those times of crisis, I'm not going to be there by myself. I don't know where he is. I saw my friend Father Gallon DeLay right back there, right? I can rely on him. We can, when we're working on something, that if he says we're going to do something, we will do it. Okay, so the first question we ask ourselves is, who can we get in the room? Do we actually have some talent? Do we have some vision? By the way, we don't see the word follower as a bad word in organizing, okay? There are people who lead me, and there are people who I lead in different venues in my life, okay? But in this work, in the public arena, whatever the issue is we're working on, especially when it's of such prime time importance that we get moving on this, we really need to be clear that we have some leaders in the room. Looks like we do tonight. The iron rule of organizing. It's a little bit different than the golden rule. Don't do for others. Don't do for others what they won't do for themselves. Don't do for others what they can do for themselves. Excuse me, what they can do for themselves. Right? Why do you think that is? Anyone?
Become lethargic and won't pursue the goal.
Absolutely, they'll become lethargic. We're not trying to create a social service agency here. God bless social service agencies. We know we need them. We're trying to engage people in getting out there and making a statement, right? Governor Cuomo, the assembly person, they heard more from the vocal minority about that bill, I think, than they heard from the silent majority. We need to get people out into the streets. So that's question one. Do we have leaders? Question two. Apologies for the sort of setup here. Are we dealing with a problem or an issue? And this is what we mean by it. A problem is vast, it's general, it's beyond our grasp. It's the kind of things that we talk about in sociology classes at universities or conferences. An issue is specific, immediate, and actionable. It's realizable, something we can do something about. Crime is a problem. It's the kind of thing that they ask presidential candidates about. An issue can be drugs sold at a specific location, at a specific time, by a specific group of people. In the South Bronx Churches, the organization where I was for 4 years, which has been around for a while, we have now a long-standing practice of getting and working with about 5 different police precincts where we bring in very detailed, specific issues and go directly to the commanding officer of the police precinct. And we say, these are the 15 hotspots where I'm taking my daughter to school. I don't want her to see those guys dealing drugs, okay? I don't want to see that kind of, this particular criminal activity going on, where these guys come and drink and use drugs and defecate in my park, right? The power of the issue, the power of having specific things that you can point to, that you can see, is that it's easy to understand. It's also something that you can hold elected officials and corporate bodies accountable for. You can say, here are my list of 15 grievances, and then we get to go back to them in a year and say, did you resolve them? I think that one of the things that our organization is nonpartisan. I know that the Episcopal Diocese is nonpartisan. But one of the things that Democrats don't get is this, frequently, right? The healthcare debate, which had very many real problems inside of it, when it was getting negotiated in Congress, was a backroom deal story. They never had the story of the 200 people, of the 200 children that had been kicked off of insurance because they turned 24 and were out of work, or the people who had gotten really sick and then couldn't get health insurance because of pre-existing conditions because they were in between work, right? Those are issues. Those tell your story. LBJ, you remember the most famous political ad? The little girl counting the flowers, right? Or you think about when the Clinton administration tried to do the his health care initiative, And what did the healthcare industry do? Harry and Louise, remember? Remember those ads? This man and this woman, this couple, and they were sitting there going through their bills and all these costs. They told a story that people could understand. We have to understand the story we're talking about. A problem would be pollution. An issue is a specific type of pollution in a specific place over a given time by a polluter. In New Jersey, in our organization in New Jersey Together, for example, this wasn't an easy issue, but there was chromium in Jersey City that had been dumped over the course of years. And working with the National Resources Defense Council, they've now gotten, over 20 years, a fight, a big victory, the biggest environmental justice victory of $1 billion cleanup of Chromium City in Jersey City and Watertown County. So when we're talking about gun violence, I totally agree, by the way, with the governor's staff person. I shy away from the term gun control, not because I have any issue with saying that we should control guns, but rather because we need to sort of reframe the debate. People think about gun control and it sort of, it associates it. We have to sort of own our own issue that we're working on. So we say gun violence and gun safety. But still, even gun violence is still a problem. It's still something that's bigger than us. Whereas the easy access to guns for those who shouldn't have them, that may be the beginning of something that's issuable, right? When we started having our conversations in Westchester County, there were people who said, you know, mental health is a real issue. And when we were there Thursday night, there was a gentleman from Bridgeport who'd done a lot of anti-violence work and had buried a lot of kids coming out of a African-American Baptist church in Bridgeport. And he said, you know, violence prevention is really a problem that we should be working on. And those are both true. You know, mental health is getting cut. Violence in some areas is a real problem. It's also what the NRA wants us to be thinking about, because it distracts us. It's not that it's not true, but I think we have a moment in history right now where we might be able to touch on a lot of shared concerns and build on a broader body policy. Gun safety would be a problem where specific policies for stores, either legal or voluntary, could make that problem of gun safety issuable. And we will talk a little bit about that. Question 3, are we developing a power analysis before we go into action? And are we going into action with a clear picture of who the players are and how they connect? The story I told you about the work with the police precincts, we don't talk to the community affairs departments. That's where they always try and send you to when you go to the police department. Anyone ever try and bring something up with a local police precinct? How easy is it to get to the commanding officer? Right? At least in New York City, I think at least in New York City, that's pretty hard. But because we have a reputation, our organization's hard fought of having, detail, that discipline for detail, we could get to the person who is in the decision-making position, who can decide where police are patrolled, what actions they take. So, who are the decision makers? Who's responsible? Who are they connected to? What other things do we need to do? So here's a little outline of a power analysis that I've done around the gun control and the gun violence issue and problem in the United States. What's been tried on gun control? Legislatively, believe it or not, I can only find 6 major pieces of legislation that have tried to respond to the need for gun violence in the history of the country. And this, I'm sorry for this, let me go over it. I can only find 6, 2, 4, 6. 1934 National Firearms Act, FDR responding to the rise of Prohibition-era gangs. A few years later, they create a National Federal Firearm Licensee, which is just to license the people who sell weapons. The 1968 Gun Control Act, right, after Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were killed, building off of the concern Lee Harvey Oswald, who killed JFK, had done it with what? What kind of gun?
Military weapon.
And I understand it was a mail order weapon. Yes. Right? That was the first major piece of gun, that's where the term gun control really emerged, is my understanding. 1972, they create the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, so that there is an agency that actually regulates these rules. 1994, the Brady Handgun Prevention Act, which created a 5-day waiting period, right, so that crimes for handguns, crimes of passion, right, if I'm really pissed off with you, maybe if I have to wait 5 days, right, you know, Chris Rock's great line, you know, we need to have bullet control. Sort of like that. Make it cost $10,000 a bullet. Anyways, and they also really established the background check system. And then in 1994, we had what they passed, the legislature passed, the Congress passed, the much maligned assault weapons ban, right? Why is everyone giving that a lot of flack these days?
It's expired.
Well, aside from the fact that it expired, even if it hadn't expired.
It was reintroduced last year.
What was wrong with the 1994 assault weapons ban? Anyone? Show of hand. There were huge loopholes, right? It was incredibly difficult to create it. This is not a fault of the people, the creators. It's hard to get legislation through, but they could only actually get 19 specific assault-style weapons banned, and then the industry said, well, this is what a ban is? Okay, well, we're going to make this kind of gun. It's not exactly an assault weapon, right? And there became a whole round of what they called post-ban guns. And it was in that same year that the Republicans take back the House, for the first time in, I think, after the war, and Bill Clinton literally says the NRA is the reason the Republicans control the House, right? That's a different loophole. That's the gun show loophole. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in 1 second. I also just want to say a little bit about the national mythology of the NRA. You may recall that people blamed the Al Gore loss, the first time Bush won, Bush the second, on the NRA, right? I don't know how many of you remember this, but the day before the Kerry's election and race, voting day, whatever it's called, when the day before the vote, I guess it was like November 3rd that year, 2004, where did John Kerry go? One of the most important days of his life, the day he'd been waiting for. He went hunting. As if he had a moment to relax. I'm just going to go hunting, right? No, it's because everyone was scared that this was the defining thing that a president couldn't lose. I, by the way, do not agree with that assessment. I think that there are a lot of things that go into national elections. But anyways, that was the national mythology. And it wasn't until 2013, until February, when President Obama, who, by the way, was not strong on gun control in his previous stint, in his first term, or in his campaign. You remember the last summer after Aurora, they asked him in the town hall? Anyone see that? He totally dodged the question. Both of them did. No one wanted to touch it. So 2013, we have a sweeping gun control package that is supported, universal background checks, many of which, some of these things we do not know that they have very much legs on it. So what else has been tried on gun control? Another idea was legally and otherwise. 1997, the Clinton administration was actually successful in negotiating a voluntary gun safety effort with some of these two gentlemen were executives with Glock, the major gun manufacturer, the new police weapon, basically. And they were willing to do this because Does anyone remember this? Does anyone remember any of the politics here? No. So Clinton was pretty sure he was going to be able to get this guaranteed safety bill passed. And they said, let's do it voluntarily, we'll negotiate with you. They split with the NRA, caused a lot of friction. The gentleman on the right here, Richard Feldman, had started he had another nonprofit shooting sports foundation, I think it was. After this, the NRA circled around him, got him kicked out of that organization. And that organization no longer exists. Paul Genuso is just another executive. So they come to this agreement on trigger locks sold with every gun. 1990, the other thing that was emerging is that there was a series of municipal lawsuits. You may remember in 1998 was the end of the tobacco lawsuits. You remember the attorneys general? Yeah. 1998 is when it finished. $200 million settlement. There were a bunch of cities who started to say, maybe we could do this too. Maybe we could do this with the gun industry. Forget about NRA, forget about the Congress. Let's bring it straight to them. Mayor of Philadelphia, Ed Rendell, starts talking about it. Glock executives actually go and talk to him and say, maybe we can negotiate something. Maybe this doesn't have to be a lawsuit. But as soon as he held the press conference, shortly thereafter, they fined, gun control groups fined 30 mayors and the NAACP who want to file these lawsuits. And so that negotiation behind closed doors goes nowhere. The lawsuits are going nowhere. Clinton and then HUD Secretary Andrew Cuomo tried to unite them all under one lawsuit in the name of all of the public housing tenants, the hundreds of thousands of public housing tenants across the country, and tried to get them to agree to a code of conduct. Believe it or not, both Glock and Smith & Wesson show interest, two of the major manufacturers. Smith & Wesson signs a 25-page agreement with the HUD Secretary at the time, including child safety measures, no magazines over 10 rounds. They will spend 2% of their revenue on research and development for smart gun technology. That's an anti-ballistics effort, like microstamping. And they even agreed to doing gun a month. People ever heard of gun a month? That legislation? In other words, if I'm working on behalf of a gang from the south side of Chicago, I'm going to go down to Mississippi with my car, buy a trunk full of guns, bring it back, hand them out. Gun a month theoretically cuts back on that gun trafficking, and when it's been passed in different places. Voluntarily, Smith & Wesson is willing to do it, and Glock backs out. They signed a 25-page memorandum. Cuomo and Smith & Wesson get together in Hartford, sign an agreement, publicize it to the world, and Glock says, we were just talking, we're not interested. And Smith & Wesson, basically the NRA and all of the gun rights activist groups circle around Smith & Wesson. They boycott them. The distribution, their contracts are canceled, and the CEO eventually has to resign, and the company backs out. This is just a really interesting book about Glock that came out last year by the journalist Paul Barrett. That is Gaston Glock, the inventor of the Glock. And I just want to say one of the most interesting things about this story, by the way, is that the Glock, is anyone here at all familiar with guns? Don't be embarrassed. A little bit, okay. The Glock revolutionized the pistol market. This is a very easy, quick read. You can get it on an ebook. And you can get it on Audible, actually, too. This guy had never designed a gun before in his life. The Austrian government, the Austrian army wanted a new gun. And he basically was a car radiator manufacturer, engineer, and said, what do you want? He got all the firearms experts around the table, and in 2 years he designed what has now been called the perfect gun. It's an amazing story for me because if you think about the fact that he designed what's been called the perfect gun in 2 years, responding to a public agency, it shows what the gun industry could do if it wanted to. That's a picture of the Glock on the right, which replaced the Smith & Wesson revolver. Anyways, Glock refuses to sign. Cuomo tries to threaten, and they call Cuomo's bluff, and the lawsuits lose. And we go back to square one here. One interesting thing that came out of the lawsuits, though, is that there was information that came out that 1%, fewer than 1%, there's something like 60,000 licensed gun stores in the country. Fewer than 1% of them between 1996 and 2000, it turned out, provided over 60% of the guns used in crime. So that was what we based our campaign on in Chicago. This gun store here, Bell's Guns, was shown in undercover operations to knowingly sell weapons to criminals. So we began to protest outside. I think one of the things that worked here is that we had a really diverse group of folks, people who lived with some of the day in and day out of gun violence, as well as hunters, people who had familiarity with guns, people who grew up around guns and said, you know, I'm okay with my rifle, but we don't need these other style guns, right? And it's that breadth, and that not just having the sort of usual suspects, I think, that made our campaign politically interesting. We also did some really important research. Over here on the left, you see we did a title search. One of the times we started campaigning, we brought attention, we got coverage in all of the news, and they revoked their license. But guess what happened a few months later? They gave their license back. They were back in business. This is something that happens a lot. The ATF is totally understaffed, right? So it's very easy. You take your license away, you give it back. It's just sort of a revolving door. There's actually right now an effort in Congress to tell the ATF that you cannot inspect a gun store more than once a year, even though the ATF says it can't even get to them once 8 years, right? Anyways, we were able to show that there were people on the property records who had always been part of this, the same people, and that was a violation of the Federal Gun Control Act. We sent that to the ATF. We had the ally, I don't know if you can see it up here, but that's Congressman Rahm Emanuel's stationery. He actually represented the area at the time. He joined with us in our effort with that letter. And we also had police with us. So that brings us to the fourth question. Do my little dance here. Who are our allies and potential allies, and how can they help us? Who are the allies and potential allies of the person or institution we're dealing with, right? So thinking about that gun store campaign, if you were crafting that gun store campaign, who would be some of the allies you would want to look for?
Police.
Police? Who else?
People in the area.
City government? Hunters. Citizens. Military, absolutely. Educators, people who are affected by violence, and people who are part of regulating the police and safety patrols, and also people who are involved in the gun industry. And victims, absolutely.
Clergy.
So one of the things that we learned, I was in a conversation with the head of the Chicago Fraternal Order of Police, and I was trying to get him to be one of our allies. And he said, Bell's Guns? You know, I bought my service weapon at Bell's Guns. And I was like, are you sure that's the same Bell's Guns? And he said, yeah, I'm sure it is. In fact, a lot of us buy our service weapons at Bell's Guns. And we thought to ourselves, what? This store had over 700 guns show up in crime scenes in the last 4 years. Well, it turns out this is statistics as of December. 40% of the gun market, of guns and ammunition, 40% of the market in the US is military and law enforcement. So Metro IF right now, what we're trying to figure out is if we can get police, military, and other large purchasers of weapons and ammunition to try and influence the industry. That's the block, service weapons. Another thing I might ask if I was working in Poughkeepsie, I drove in with a cab today, and I was in a cab with 3 other people, including the driver, and they apparently couldn't stop talking before I even got in. And peppered me with all sorts of questions, so I said, fine, this is what I'm here for. And, you know, it's a gun control effort, it's a rally. What do you guys think of gun control? And they all said, you know. One person said, oh, it's good, it's good, it's good. And the driver was like, you know, I'm mixed. What are you talking about? I said, well, we're talking about keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. He said, well, that sounds good. You know. If I was organizing in Poughkeepsie, I did a quick little Google of gun stores in the Poughkeepsie area. And these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I guess. If I was working with a church here, I'd want to go and check those stores out. What are they selling? I mean, they're not selling AR-15s anymore, right? The assault weapons. But are they doing common sense gun safety measures? What do they do to ensure that that there aren't straw purchasing going on, right? Those are some of the just common sense things that you don't need to be a gun expert, but you'll learn just by going into the stores. That's one example.
What is straw?
Straw purchasing means I'm asking you to buy the gun for me, because if I buy the gun, I have a felony. Let's say I've been in jail. I can't buy a gun. Okay? That's what the criminal background check does, right? And a common way that criminals get guns is through straw purchasing, where you act as the straw buyer. And that's, you know, there's some great videos online. By the way, another action that was, sorry, this wasn't through straw purchasing, but there's some great videos online where Mayors Against Illegal Guns did, where they went into a gun show and federal firearm licensees have to do criminal background checks even in gun shows, by the way. Just take a quick step back. The gun show loophole is about private sales. So I'm not a federal firearm licensee. If I want to sell you a gun, we can just do it right here. Or if I have a table full of guns and I have a gun show, we can do it for cash, we don't have to pay taxes, right? And that's a problem. We think that everyone who buys a gun should have to go through a criminal background check. That's what closing the gun show loophole is. And what they've done online, and they've done people have pretended to be purchasers. So I go to your table and I say, oh, this looks like a real gun. Oh, this looks really nice. Feels good. How does it work? How do you buy it? How does the cartridges work and whatnot? And you tell me everything you know about that gun. And then they say, okay, my wife here, she'll fill out the forms. And she'll go through the criminal background check. They have that on tape. It happens. That's called straw purchasing, and that's illegal. But it isn't enforced. Okay?
It's unenforceable.
It's hard to enforce. But
How you can do it.
But when New York City, Mayor Bloomberg sent in undercover sting operators into places like Virginia and Georgia and South Carolina and proved that they were doing this, instead of suing them, they were able to hire, as part of a court settlement, they got the 27 dealers to go through trainings, because some of these shops, the clerks are just 18-year-old kids and don't know what's going on, right? So they need to know how to recognize straw purchasers. So that's one thing that you might do. You know, the Attorney General here just did an undercover sting of all the gun shows in New York over the last year or two. Did you see that? It was in the paper on Friday. I think that's what she was talking about, right? It's another thing that these are different kinds of actions. And as a result, they were able to get all the major gun show operators to abide by certain new standards, which is great. Non-legislative approach. If I was organizing again in Poughkeepsie, I probably would not go to Sean Maloney, the newly elected congressperson from here, but I might go just to my north, just to the north, where you have Representative Chris Gibson, who got an A from the NRA and $2,500. So those are just kind of local things that you can think about. The reason we're thinking about different approaches in Westchester is because all of the representatives in our communities are on the right side here. New York State doesn't seem like there's going to be major change going on, but there is still a need for national conversation and national dialogue. So just to review, these are the questions we asked. Question 1, do we have leaders who care deeply about it? Are we dealing with a problem or an issue? Are we developing a power analysis so we target our work effectively? Are we developing a power analysis before we go into action? And then question 4 is, who are our allies and potential allies, and who are theirs? And how can we use both to our greatest effect? I'm not sure how we're doing on time. I'd be open to taking a question or two. If that's, yeah? Questions? Yeah.
How many members are there at the NRA?
I have no idea. That is a very good question.
What was the question?
The question was how many members there are of the NRA.
It used to be a little over 2 million. Now it's probably 2.5 million. And those figures are about 6 weeks old.
Here's what I would say though about the NRA.
We have 300 million people in this country.
We do.
So my question to you
Yes,
is,
go ahead.
the question is, how do these people have the power that they do?
How do these people,
How does the
how does the NRA
have the power over the people in government, given that there are 300 million people in this country and there are 2.5 million members of the NRA?
Well, what do you think the answer is?
I don't know.
The question was, how is it that this small minority has power over 300 million people? Yes. Organized money, right?
Yes.
How much money can they have?
Right there.
And there's something else. Yeah. They are, but you know what was interesting in the story about Glock is that sometimes there's a split. And you can't point everyone with a broad brush. Sometimes the NRA actually pushes them into things they don't want to. Yes?
This may be a naive question and a dumb one, but can we go to the NRA? They are not criminals, and ask them for America's sake, for our children, everybody, could you be on our side? We don't want to take.
Let me jump in and just repeat your question because I know we want to get going, moving on. People got to get home. The question was, can we go to the NRA and say, on behalf of common sense, would you work with us? I actually do not think that's a naive question. I think that we do need to be thinking about people who are in the gun community, who are in the gun rights community, because not all of them are the ones that are painting Nazi, Cuomo as a Nazi. All right? Some of them are reasonable, and I think we'll be much better off if we do think about finding out who they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. All of us remember that on December 14th of last year, 20 children and 6 of their teachers died at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, not all that far from here. It's hard to keep track of how many people die from gun violence in this country. It's hard to get a grip on those numbers. I just checked the online journal Slate, which has been trying to keep track of gun violence deaths in this country, documenting them and making sure that they have an accurate report. And as of today, in the 3 months since Newtown, they have documented 2,728 gun violence deaths in this country. In other words, more than 100 times the number of people who were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary. Gloria Cruz just told me that in that same time, in the Bronx alone, there have been 112 deaths due to gun violence. The Right Reverend Andrew Smith is a great gift to this diocese as our assistant bishop. But before he was the assistant bishop of New York, he was the Bishop of Connecticut. and he's going to talk to us for a few moments about the church's response since Newtown. Bishop Smith.
Would you all like to stand up for a minute? You want to take a stretch? Yes. Yeah, okay, good. Don't go anywhere. I bet that feels good. Yes. Great. Now you can sit back down. Thanks. I live in Connecticut, and until serving in New York, all of the ordained ministry that I've been given in the church has been served in that state. Newtown is the largest geographical town in Connecticut by area. Its main street is lined with early 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century buildings. There's a large state hospital there that is pretty much empty at this point. It's in Upper Fairfield County, which means it's at the end of the commuting line to New York City. And many of the people there do commute into the city. And it's so large that it has neighborhoods, and one of the neighborhoods is called Sandy Hook. And that's a small little region down near a bend in the river that goes by. And we have two parishes in Newtown, Trinity Church Newtown, up on the hill, Main Street, large, huge staff, active, present, bustling with activity. And St. John's in Sandy Hook, which is next door to the elementary school, tiny family church, and with a priest who serves on Sundays. Sandy Hook is north of 84, and Trinity is south of Interstate 84. The last place in the world. One would think something like what happened in December would take place. Connecticut is also one of the major gun manufacturing states in the whole United States. You heard Adam talk about Smith & Wesson meeting with Cuomo in Hartford. Colt firearms, the gun that won the West, or that killed off and subdued the Native Americans. Samuel Colt invented his revolver and set up his manufactory in Hartford. If you drive through on Interstate 91, the great big blue dome of the Colt manufactory is right there alongside the highway. And the family in its largesse took care of its workers and built a church, an Episcopal church, the Church of the Good Shepherd, right down in the Dutch Point area. And I hope you'll go there sometime because it's amazing to go up to the door and see the pillars alongside the entrance door, and at the top, the capitals are carved gun parts. Bullet molds, stocks of pistols supporting the archway over the entrance into the church. Winchester had a major manufactory in New Haven. I'm not sure of all of the manufacturers who are in the state of Connecticut, but I do know that we still manufacture assault weapons in West Hartford at the Colt factory. There is an association of gun manufacturers that lobbies for their interests. Let me tell you where their headquarters is: Newtown. So we are all kind of involved. And when we talk about separation of church and state and capitalism and all those kinds of things, it's all us. And in Connecticut, it's all mixed together. After the massacre in Newtown, one of the things we did in the church was to pray for the victims. And the hardest victims to pray for were Adam Lanza and his mother. But we did pray for them, as well as the children, as well as the teachers and administrators. Our bishops in Connecticut, not I'm retired, spent 4 days in Newtown with the priests and with the families, getting to know them, just simply being present with them and caring for them pastorally. After that, The bishops have appeared before the legislature in Connecticut, which is considering, I will say, gun control, I'm not afraid of that at all, legislation, and have spoken on behalf of our diocese. New York, bango, put legislation in effect. Connecticut formed a study commission. But it's interesting because that commission has given an opportunity for many parts of the state and many opinions to be heard. So it's still in progress. Also, the diocese is sponsoring on Monday and Holy Week a walk against gun violence in Washington, D.C. What the diocese is working to do is to mobilize as many people as possible to go to D.C., hospitality provided by the Diocese of Washington, and to publicly demonstrate, as a state that's so involved in this issue, our opposition to anything that would limit our ability to limit the kinds of weapons that are sold and used. So if you're free and want to go to DC on Monday and Holy Week, go on down, but check with Connecticut's website because they need to know how many people might be there for the... For me personally, a couple of things have been really emerging as I've watched what happened in Connecticut from really the perspective of serving here in New York. I've seen two attempts at major deflection of the issue. One is to say the real problem is mental health. Adam talked about this, and I think that Bishop Dici did too, a little bit before, and it's a deflection. Of course mental health is a problem, but the issue is guns that are intended for mass destruction. The second is raised by the Association of Gun Manufacturers in Connecticut, which is a real consequence of any limiting legislation, which would be state unemployment. So be it. We'll have to adjust, and we can make adjustments if that is one of the costs. One of the parallels that has occurred to me is the parallel internationally with weapons owned personally. Because when we talk of weapons of mass destruction, and we talk about nuclear weapons, there's no question in the world that we want to limit those or remove those. And in our negotiations with Iran and North Korea and so forth, that's on the front burner right now. We're against proliferation. Why can't we use that same sort of logic in approaching this issue also? It's about the weapons. It's about the weapons. A couple of things just to say that in terms of Adam's very, very helpful presentation, while we have to work on issues, someone has to continue to address the problem. And I think that's a responsibility that we can have as the church. While we do address the issues, legislation and the particular issues that we can manage, we also have to address the problem and keep that alive. Because someone has to do that. It's within the context of the problem that the issues need to be addressed. Our church must pastor people and be with people who are victims of gun violence. That goes absolutely without saying. And can we ourselves learn more? The questions we've asked here, the questions I have, my own lack of knowledge. Can we educate ourselves as church people more and more by learning about what is the NRA, how many people are there, what is their influence and so forth, who are these gun manufacturers, what is Glock versus a Smith & Wesson, all those kinds of things. Let's educate ourselves and then let's teach. Let's teach in our churches, in our communities about these weapons and about the issues. Keep the stories of people who have been destroyed by guns alive. If we let it just become a problem or an issue, the human element is lost. I cannot ever get out of my mind the picture I have of those children in Newtown huddled on a classroom floor being shot to pieces. We have to tell the story and keep the images alive. Form coalitions. Again, Adam talked about this, maybe with really unlikely partners, but form coalitions and work together, and let our churches create safe places for our kids so that they're not on the streets, not having to join gangs, where they can be cherished and kept in safe places. Ultimately, we don't have the money that the other guys do. But what we have is our heart, our prayers, our numbers, our energy, our compassion, our concern, and our knowledge of what is right. And if we can stay together and focus on the problem as well as the issues, heaven and earth indeed might move. Thank you very much.